Good afternoon. My name is Craig M., and I will forever be a very grateful member of the Worldwide Fellowship of Alanon, which includes Alateen. Hi, everybody. So glad to be here. Chris, thanks for the invitation. I've got all kinds of fun to make of people, so I'm going to start with Chris. You know, she called me a few months ago, and she left me a voicemail, and she said, I just listened to your AMOT recording, and you made me cry. And I thought, oh, God, I've made other women cry, and what comes next is not going to be good. Nobody ever asked me to come to McHenry's Soberfest in the next breath. So thank you, Chris, for having me. I'm honored to be here. It's great. I also want to tease the Badger fans in the room. It's very clever of you to invite Rhonda and I here on the weekend that Wisconsin's playing in Lincoln. Nice, so two less voices to root on. So I just have one thing to say. Go Big Red. Anyway, one of us is going to be bowl eligible later this afternoon. We'll see. Anyway, thank you again. I want to thank the committee, Susan, and the committee, and anybody who had anything to do with Rhonda and I being here. I want to also thank all the other speakers, and Diane and John last night, and Harold this morning. Dylan, God, I always mean to say to the committee, don't make me follow the Alateen. It's just a killer. And you did a great job. You're proud, really a good representative. I'm still having a hard time getting it together because of your talk. Thank you. And, we're going to hear, is it Gemma later, and then Amy tomorrow. So I'm really looking forward to their talks as well. Everything, I'm not conference approved. And by the time I finish here, I guarantee you, everybody in this room and in the overflow room, if there is anybody, will fully understand why. This is just, my opinion, based on my experience, and I'm not selling nothing. But I've learned that if I talk long enough, it's inevitable I'm going to offend somebody. So I've learned to make my amends right up front. So, boy, am I sorry for whatever it is I'm about to say that's going to make you upset. But, I just take what you like. And one thing I would say, though, is everything I have to share today I learned from you. So keep that in mind. If I could tell you only one thing about my life, it would be this. I'm the oldest of three children. I was born in northern Iowa, not a terrible long distance from here, in a small town of 1,800 people, where the whole village raises all the kids, and I had like 900 sets of parents, I swear, and I couldn't get away with anything. It was a perfect place to grow up, and we didn't have alcoholism, not in the way that you would easily recognize it in my family of origin. There was no alcohol. The little bit of alcohol that my mom and dad had, they kept high in a cupboard in the kitchen, and I can remember just rare occasions. My father would go up and to this high cupboard and bring down a small bottle of clear liquid gin or vodka, or whatever it was, and he'd mix, like for a special occasion, he'd mix one drink for he and my mom to share. I know there's a whole room of people in here that can't identify with that at all. Alcohol was treated with a great deal of reverence and respect, and it wasn't abused. We lived in a house that my grandfather built, and he and my grandmother lived next door in a house that he built again. And there wasn't alcohol, but there was alcoholism. We learn here, don't we, that alcoholism isn't the alcohol. Alcohol is like sneezing with a cold, right? Alcoholism is way deeper, and it's that restless, irritable discontent, and we had that in my father and my grandfather, the rage and the anger. And I thought I was the cause of that, because I seemed to always be there when my father or my grandfather would lose their temper. My grandparents would watch us kids occasionally when my mom and dad had somewhere to be, go out for the evening or something. And I can remember on Saturday nights, my grandfather and grandmother would be watching us, and they'd have friends in to play cards. And I can remember sitting on my grandfather's lap while they played cards, and he'd pour a little bit of beer in a juice glass for me. And I remember I liked it. And I asked, but you know what I learned about that experience, I was like 3 or 4 or 5 years old, but as the beer drinking progressed, the card playing got a little more serious, the voices got a little more sharp-edged, and then the fun would just slip out of the evening. And I asked my father once, is it possible that Grandpa was an alcoholic? No, he said, Grandpa didn't drink. It didn't agree with him. My experience with my grandfather's drinking was quite a bit different than that. I don't call my grandfather an alcoholic. He didn't either. But I got to tell you, it looked like a duck to this 3-year-old. I went to college in Iowa. I graduated from college, and my brother was still in school, and so he invited me to a college party. And I went to this party, and I walked into this apartment, and there across the room sat Linda. By the way, I should stop right here and introduce Rhonda. This is not Linda. Stand up, beautiful. I just want a side note. Rhonda and I met as delegates for Alanon. She from South Dakota and me from Nebraska. And there's all kinds of miracles that have befallen me as a result of the actions that I've taken here, and you're going to hear about a few of them here. But there's the number one right there. So I went to this party, I walk into this apartment, there across the room sat Linda, and she had a joint in one hand and a beer in the other, and it was love at first sight. She was gorgeous, sexy, and I was so going home with her, and I did. And, thus began our dance with death. And, everything we did in those early years of marriage, if you couldn't drink while you did it, we didn't do it. And we loved to canoe many of the beautiful rivers in Iowa, but we never once floated a river that there wasn't a cooler of beer in the canoe. I'm a Major League Baseball fan. We go to Major League Baseball games all over the Midwest, but we always seemed to find the gate that opened earliest for batting practice, presumably, but there was always the beer vendor right there. And then they would sweep us out with the peanuts, peanut shells after the game. We had a refrigerator in our garage, and I would stack long-necked bottles of beer in that refrigerator, buy a case of beers, and I'd put them in there. And I'd be mowing the grass, and I'd come in on a hot summer day thinking, gosh, one cold beer would really taste good right now. And I'd open up the door on that fridge, and there were no beers in there. And I think, geez, I could have swore I put a case of beer in there like yesterday. I wonder what happened. And, Linda would say, no, I'll just go run out and get more. And she'd run out and she'd get a six-pack of beer, and I'd have my one cold beer, And never once did I think to ask, what happened to the 24 bottles of beer I put in there? You're getting, this is 2020, hindsight. I mean, this stuff is all going over my head at 50,000 feet. It's only in reflecting back that I can remember some of this stuff. We moved, we had our first daughter when I was in graduate school, still in Iowa, and then we moved to Illinois, not downstate, and with my career. And the drinking continued to get worse. It always does. Left untreated, this disease always progresses on, and I'm not aware of any exceptions. And that was our case. The drinking got worse. I remember thinking, the only time Linda and I fought was when we were drinking, and I didn't want to fight with her anymore. And so I decided I was going to quit drinking, so we could quit. I didn't want to fight with her anymore. And I just naturally assumed that if I quit drinking, she'd quit drinking. No. And the drinking just continues to progress. We had our first daughter, Krista, while we were both back in school. I was in graduate school. Linda was finishing her undergraduate degree. I tell this next story just to give you an idea. This is not a criticism of Linda, but rather to give you some from my perspective, how this disease can impact me. I came home from work one day, and Krista was 3 or 4 years old, and they draped Krista met me at the front door, and she's screaming, crying, "Daddy, Daddy, Mommy's calling me a liar." What? No, Mommy's calling me a liar. They draped a blanket over the top of a door onto a piece of furniture. You know how to make a little tent to play in. And Krista had been playing in that day, and the blanket had slipped off the top of the door, and Krista asked if her mom would put that blanket back on top of the door, and Linda denied having done that. I've just gotten home. There's nobody else in the house except Linda, a 3-year-old, and me. I didn't put the blanket up on top of the door. The 3-year-old surely didn't put the blanket up on the top. Why would Linda deny doing something that she obviously had done? Why would she do that? Well, you guys have already figured it out. I can see it in your faces. Everybody in this room knows what a blackout is. You know, Linda had a blackout that afternoon and didn't remember having put the blanket on top of the door. I didn't know that there are people who lose their memory when they drink alcohol. I've not had that experience. All I know is the mother of my daughter is denying something to her that she obviously did. I don't know about the rest of you, but it doesn't take many of those kinds of experiences before I start losing a grip, right? What is going on? I can remember coming home from work and putting my hand on the doorknob and wondering, I wonder what kind of a day I've had today, based on what I was going to find on the other side of that door. Isn't that crazy? My day was done. I'd had whatever day I'd had, but it all hinged on whether she was sober or drunk and what was waiting for me inside that house. The loneliness and the helplessness. I can remember thinking, you know, it's nice that people have religious faith if they're dealing with something like this. I don't need that. You know, I'm a guy. And I'm going to fix this. You know, this is not the kind of life I'm supposed to have. I'm going to fix this. And there's no amount of energy that I am unwilling to put into this to get this fixed. This is not the way this is going to go. Within 2 weeks of that arrogant thought, I found myself literally on my knees saying the prayer, and we've all said it. God, please help me. Could I just have 2 or 3 close friends that I could confide in what's going on in this house and not be judged or ridiculed, laughed at, or heaven forbid, given advice? You know, could I have just 2 or 3? The watershed event for us, I worked at a university, and I was the number 2 in a department, and the university was having this leadership potluck dinner-like thing, and it was the department heads, and the department heads were expected to bring their number 2s and partners. And this was the way that this particular university would vet the heir apparents to the departments. You know, is there somebody there that's going to be able to rise to the level of department head someday, or not? And so this was a pretty big deal. So I came home and I told Linda we'd been invited to this potluck dinner, and she said, I don't want to go. I said, Linda, this isn't a social event. This is a career building event. This is not an optional thing. We gotta go. And I'm embarrassed to tell you today, I did not accept a no as an answer from her. The Friday night of that potluck dinner, I came home from work, and Linda was all made up. She looked nice. She was a good cook. She'd made a dish to share, but she was so intoxicated, she couldn't stay on her high heels. And I'm ashamed to tell you today that I drug that woman to that potluck dinner, and we hit the front door of that vice chancellor's home, and Linda went off this way to find another drink, and I went off this way to get as hell far away from her as I could. I didn't want anybody to know that I was with her. Isn't that interesting? Couldn't leave her at home, but I don't want you to know that I'm with her. During the course of that dinner, I'm standing in the doorway that led out to a garden. It was a beautiful spring evening, talking to a colleague who had never met Linda. When Linda came staggering back into the house from the garden, and she kind of passed between the two of us, bounced off the door frame, and stumbled on into the house. And this colleague said, "Who was that?" And I'm embarrassed to tell you, I put the same look on my face, and I said, "Who was that?" My boss saw me do that, and a few minutes later he called me out into the garden, and he said, "Craig, Linda's not doing too good. Man, you got to get her out of here." And so I tracked Linda down, and we made an excuse of why we had to leave before dinner, and we left. That was a Friday night. On Monday morning, that boss came into my office first thing in the morning, and he gently closed the door, and he said, "Craig, you know about Friday night?" He said, "I think you and Linda are in denial about her drinking, and you guys have got to get some help." Well, I knew he was right, and so I went home that evening, and I talked to Linda, and we decided, yes, that's right, we need help. We need marriage counseling. I don't know why we thought that was a good idea. In hindsight, it's like the wings have just fallen off our airplane. Let's try putting some air in the tires, you know. So off we go to marriage counseling, and we walk into this character's office, and he says, "Well, what seems to be the matter? That's all the opening I need." I'm in there. I said, "Well, it's her drinking. If she would just quit drinking, we'd be fine." And he looked at me and he said, "Just because somebody drinks every day doesn't mean they're an alcoholic. Linda really likes our choice of marriage counselor." PhD, you better listen to this guy. He knows what he's talking about. God, I was so embarrassed and so ashamed, and I thought, maybe it is me. Maybe the problem is my reaction to her drinking. Maybe it's not her drinking at all. And I just felt so abandoned and just alienated, like I was so alone. We went a couple more times, and then Linda and I both agreed we really didn't need the marriage counseling. We quit going. And a week or two later, we went outside of Champaign, Illinois, to this little roadhouse, and they served good food out there. We went out on a Friday night for a steak dinner, and I remember opening the door to this tavern, and there passed out at the bar is our marriage counselor. And I thought, God, not only do I marry him, but I hire him as marriage counselors. I am just an alcoholic magnet. And so to all the women in here, especially Chris, if I even start looking at you like I'm attracted to you, that should scare the hell out of you. God, what a guy. Linda had this story. She was from western North Dakota, and she had this story that she had been fine until she met and married me, but that she drank because I she was a wild horse, and that I had corralled her, and like a wild Mustang, and I'd broken her spirit. I'm not quite sure how I had done that, but by making her live in town instead of out in the country, or heaven forbid, living in Iowa instead of North Dakota. But somehow I'd broken her spirit. This was a year, of messing around with the marriage counselor, not making much progress, and I finally decided that we had our second daughter by then, Laura, was born in Champaign, and I decided I had to get help for those little girls in me. And so I found a child social worker through our employee assistance program, and I took the girls and we went. And God bless this woman. She said, you didn't make Linda drink. You're not that powerful. If anybody else had said that to me, that would have made me so angry, but I just started to cry. And then I told her about Linda and the horse, and she laughed. And she said, Linda's not a horse. $250 an hour. You know, we're making progress now. Explains 2 legs instead of 4. That's good. She said, I think you have alcoholism in your family, and you should go to Alanon, and there's a meeting tonight. Wow. There's a God thing, right? Well, in those days, there was a meeting all 7 days of the week. She didn't even have to look at a meeting list to know. There was a meeting every night back then in Champaign, and so it was a Tuesday. I went home, and I waited patiently for 7:30. And you know, I was out of ideas. I tried coming home early on the days I thought she was more likely to drink. I would beg her, if you don't love me, you surely love these 2 little girls enough to know to quit drinking. I'd look for her beer, you know, and she was always so much smarter than me. She would keep a cache of easy-to-find beers, kind of like the Easter Bunny, and so I would find them, and then I'd pour those down the drain, and I'd have a tissy fit. And, you know, she probably had a whole Budweiser distributorship sitting over here somewhere. You know, I'd pour it down the drain, and, you know, I'll just get more. So it was like water off the back of an elephant. You know, it just had no effect. So 7:30 finally gets there, and I'm in my first Alanon meeting, and there's, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 women, quite a bit older than me, all women. And you go around the room and you start talking about God. And I thought, oh, geez, you know, the mother of my kids is home drinking. I probably shouldn't even be here. And now I've gotten involved in some half-baked religious cult. You know, my life just keeps getting better. You went around the room. And you read the steps and traditions, as we read today, and I heard you read the 5th tradition. And you said each Alanon family group has but one purpose: to help families of alcoholics. My God, I'd been looking for you. And you went around the room and you told my story, and I thought, that damn social worker, she probably had dinner with these gals, and they wrote it all. They probably scripted it on like their dinner napkins. You know, you couldn't even. They'd memorize the lines because I couldn't even see them reading their lines. But they clearly had. This was all for my benefit because, you know, it's all about me. You know, I heard this speaker say, "I may not be much, but I'm all I ever think about." You know. And they went around the room and they told my secrets. How could you explain how they were telling things about me that I had never admitted to anyone in my life except that social worker a couple of hours earlier that afternoon? At the end of the meeting, you wanted to give me a hug. It's like, oh, please. I mean, you can come as close as George and Amott right here. I'm not a hugger, no. But there was a woman named Pat, and she's since left this world, God bless her. But she came right through the stop signs, you know. And she got me in her arms, and she gave me the biggest hug. And she whispered in my ear so that only I could hear. And she said, Craig, if you come to these meetings and you do what these good people ask you to do, you'll never be alone again. How'd she know? I hadn't even told the social worker how alone I was. How'd she know that? I went to meetings and I learned quickly that if you want to progress in this program, you need a sponsor. So there was a guy I saw at my meetings. His name was Chuck. I went up and asked him if he would be my sponsor, and he said yes, and I never saw him again. And I thought, God, I must be a particularly difficult case, you know, because just asking this poor guy just blew him right out those doors, you know. I did run into Chuck in another venue later, and he came up and apologized. He said, I shouldn't agree to be your sponsor. So I kept going to meetings, and there was a guy named Sam, and Sam scared me because Sam had a sponsor. He was working the steps, and I knew something about Sam. I knew if I asked him, he was going to say yes, and if he said yes, I was going to have to do the steps. Yikes, I'm not sure I want to do the steps. But I walked up to him, and I couldn't even get the words out of my mouth, and I said something like, Sam, would you consider like going over the 12 steps with me? And he put his hand up like this. He said, stop. If you're asking me to be your sponsor, my answer's yes. And I said, well, yeah, that's what I'm asking. But, this last guy, I blew him right out of the program, so I thought maybe we need to go a little slower. Maybe sponsorship's like dating. We should have coffee first, Can't just go right to sponsorship. That's just wrong, He said, here's my phone number. I want you to call me every day for 3 weeks. If you miss, you'll start over. Here's a list of books I want you to buy. I haven't got a car right now, so I want you to take me to the grocery store. If anybody here knows where that's at in our literature, please come up afterwards. I haven't found that one yet. He says, and while I'm shopping for groceries, we can talk. And I thought, yeah, I knew it was going to be like this. Got to buy books, got to call him every day, got to take him to the... Oh, man, I knew it was going to be like this. I got stuff to do, He said, take an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, draw a line down vertically down the middle of that page, and on the top of the left-hand column, write power over, and over the column right-hand side, powerless over. I want you to start writing down everything that comes into your mind on one side or the other of that sheet of paper. When you think you've got a complete list, I want you to call me and read that to me. And thus began the greatest journey of my life. We went to meetings. We had a carload of guys, about 5 guys. People say this all the time, just get in the car, right? Just get in the car. And we'd get in the car, and we'd go up to Rantoul. Some of you know where Rantoul, they had a meeting up in Rantoul. I think back then it was a one night that Champaign didn't have a meeting. We'd go up to Rantoul, and we'd double the size of their meeting. We'd come in there with these 5 guys, God, we had I remember there was a comet like Kohoutek, or I don't remember, one of the comets. I remember looking at the comet as we drove north out of Champaign to Rantoul. And one night I'm looking at the comet, and I'm in this car, and we're laughing, all guys, 5 guys, and I think of that prayer, could I have just 2 or 3 friends? And here I am in a carload of them. I had always wanted to play the guitar. I had no interest in learning how to play the guitar. I just wanted to play the guitar. But I didn't even own a guitar, so that made it even really hard. So I went out and I bought a guitar and I signed up for a few lessons, and I honestly don't play, and I never played well. But the reason I share that with you is I really do believe that was maybe the first thing as an adult I ever did for me, for myself. But at the end of the first, I'd been in Alanon about a year, and I came to the end of the first guitar book, and I found some words in the back of the guitar book, believe it or not, that I want to share with you. It said, at some times you will feel that your progress has been halted and that you are on a plateau. This feeling is shared by almost everyone, and if you realize this and continue your regular practice without feeling incompetent or discouraged, you'll soon pass through this stage and on to further achievement. The author of that book thought that was about guitar. No, they were talking about my program. I hate my Alanon anniversary. It's just a day or two approaching my Alanon anniversary. It's like I forget everything you ever taught me. And I have one day of the pre-Alanon Craig. And I hate it. I just hate it. And I was having one of those days. That was so kind of you. Thank you. I was having one of those days, so I called Sam, and I'm whining to him about, I bought you the books. I called you every day. I didn't miss. I took you to the store. And I'm not getting this. I want my money back. You know. And Sam listened to me patiently, and he said, I want you to make a gratitude list of at least 26 things for which you are grateful. And inside this voice, I didn't say it out loud, but inside my head, I'm going, I don't want to make a damn gratitude list. I just want to keep feeling sorry for myself. And then he said, and I think you need to get to a meeting. And it was like, oh my gosh, this was the one night a week I didn't go to a meeting. I was going to like 6 meetings a week back then. But I didn't say that either. And he said, there might be somebody there you can help. Wow. You know where I was that night? The last thing on my mind was helping you. Because I was totally into me. And that's when I started to get it. You know, I told you at the beginning, I'm not conference approved. This is Craig. This is the truth according to me. There's a gift here. And if you've been here any length of time, I don't need to tell you what the gift is. But something that you may not know is that if you want to keep it, you got to give it away. I've learned that lots of other places. I love an avid bicycle rider, and you know, when I'm riding downhill with the wind at my back, I'm like Greg LeMond. Don't be messing with me. But when I'm riding uphill into a headwind, you know, I'm like Craig, old fart's got no business being on a bike without a motor, you know, and so I've ridden my bicycle across Iowa 15 times, you know, part of the great bike ride across Iowa. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar. So one day, and it's always the last full week in July when it's nice and cool in Iowa. So I'm riding my bicycle through Iowa, and it was if you think Iowa's flat, come ride a bike across that thing. Holy crap. And it was hilly, and it was 100 degrees, and we had about a 30-mile-an-hour headwind, and I was dying. And I said this little prayer. I said, God, this is too hard for me. I don't think I'm going to make it. And the thought that occurred to me was, find somebody to help. Find somebody to help. About that time, these kids, teenage kids, came by me on their bicycles that weighed just a little more than my Honda Accord, you know, and but I have no pride, so I tuck in behind them to suck a little draft, you know. And I'm sitting back there behind these kids, and I can't help but overhear this one girl is talking to her girlfriend next to her, and she's crying. And I hear her say, I'm not going to make it. This is too hard. And I thought of those words, find somebody to help. And so I rode up next to them, and I introduced myself, and I asked them if they knew anything about drafting. No, it's like they bought the bicycles that morning and decided to ride them across Iowa, you know. So I said, I'm going to go in front of you, and you guys line up single file behind me. And I said, I think you'll find it'll be a little easier. So I did that, and I hadn't been pulling 30 seconds. And this guy rode up next to us, and he saw what I was doing, and he said, hey, can I take a turn? And he got in front of me. And then a gal and a gal and a guy got in front of him, and within 2 minutes, we have 50 bicycles, all single file. And I looked down at the little computers, you know, that we have on our bikes, and we're going twice as fast as we had been going just minutes earlier. And those kids behind me, they're singing songs and telling their story, you know. And we rode all day. That's how this works. You know, by myself, I'm nothing. But with you, there is nothing I cannot do. I learned that from you. I learned that on that bike. I learned that from Sam. It's my privilege to sponsor a few guys, and I want to tell you a couple of stories about how I met some of them. One of the things that I did years ago was I was a volunteer for the Alanon hotline, you know, so people could call to get meeting information. Oh, I've got to tell you this. I can't tell this without telling this. It's a little sidebar. So 3 a.m., I get an Alanon hotline call, 3 a.m. And it's this guy, and he's afraid he's going to drink. Mike, he's afraid he's going to drink. And I said, man, this is Alanon. He goes, well, yeah, I know. So I talked to the guy for a while. Well, it turns out he's in AA. He's got an AA sponsor. I said, why don't you call your sponsor? He goes, well, hell, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. He gave me a resentment. Anyway, I'm reading a book about Mount Everest one night, and there was a famous disaster that befell the climbers. A lot of people died trying to summit Mount Everest. It's been made into an IMAX film and stuff. And so I had been reading this book. It's a very interesting story, and I had just taken a break and put my bookmark in the book, and I closed the book and just to rest my eyes and say a little prayer. And I said, God, do you think I could see Mount Everest someday? I think I'd like to do that. And I'm not exaggerating. Back then we had landlines, and the phone by my elbow went off, now. I said the prayer, and the phone rang. I pick it up, and it's an Alanon hotline call, and it's this guy, and his wife is drinking and drugging, and he's living in a hotel in their backyard so he can see the house that he can't go to, and he's all pissed off. Anyway, I talked to, his name is Lalit, and we talked, and I share this story with his permission, and it's my privilege to sponsor Lalit, but during the course of the conversation, I said to Lalit, Lalit, if you don't mind me asking, you speak impeccable English, but I can tell that it's not your first language. Do you mind if I ask, where are you from? He said, I'm from Nepal. I think my chances of seeing Mount Everest have just gone way up. Right? It's my privilege to sponsor him, and Lalit's actually the delegate for the state of Nebraska today, and thank you. Yeah. And I still haven't gotten to Nepal, and he keeps saying, Craig, you got to come with me one of these trips to Nepal so we can close the loop on that story. You've been telling it for years. Linda was getting Laura, our youngest daughter, ready for one of the last days of school. And by now we had moved to Nebraska. And she yells downstairs that Laura had collapsed at her feet. And I rushed up, and there in the bathroom floor laid our youngest daughter. And she was ashen gray, and I thought we'd lost her. And called 911, got the ambulance on the scene, and I'm happy to say that turned out it wasn't serious. She had some kind of an inner ear thing, and she just fainted. But we didn't know that, and so we transported her to the hospital there in Lincoln. And now I'm sitting in the examination room at the emergency room, and I'm full of a resentment of the $2,500 ambulance ride that Laura really enjoyed, by the way. Full sirens and lights, and And I'm thinking of all the money I've just spent unnecessarily because it really wasn't the medical emergency we thought it was. And so I've got a bit of a resentment over that. And on the wall is a box of latex gloves. They're probably not made out of latex anymore, but you know what I'm talking about. In every doctor's office, there's boxes of gloves. And so I thought, I should just steal some of those gloves. Just shove them in my pocket, as an offset to the $2,500. Now do you understand why I'm qualified to be your speaker? Yeah. Now, I can tell by looking at some of the faces out here, if I don't explain to you why I wanted the latex gloves, you're going to go through the rest of this day thinking horrible things that I'm going to save you from your thoughts. I have a couple classic cars, and I wrench on them a little bit. I'm not much of a mechanic, but I don't like getting oil and grease under my fingernails. And so I wanted the latex gloves for when I work on these cars. But I'm proud to say my program held, and I thought, you know what, that would be stealing. And I swear, I said to myself, if God wants you to have those latex gloves, he'll put them in your path someday. That's what I thought, and I didn't steal them. It wasn't a week. It was 2 or 3 days, like 2 or 3 days later. I'm riding my bicycle across Lincoln from an Alanon meeting, in fact. I think it was a Saturday. And I'm randomly just taking left-hand turns and right-hand turns, generally working my way south across town. I really don't care how I get there. And I come around a corner of an intersection in a neighborhood I'd never been in my life. And laying in the middle of the intersection is an unopened box of latex gloves. Have you ever cried and laughed at the same time? You know, I could see from a distance what it was, and I got snot coming out my nose, and I'm looking up and going, you are so funny. This is unbelievable. That's the kind of life that you've given me. You know, it's not what I know. We've got all these books and literature, and it's great stuff. But this is not an academic exercise. You can't learn your way out of this. It's what I do. And here's what I do. I work the steps. I have a sponsor today. His name is Bart. He lives in Reno, Nevada. Hi, Bart. I love you. I go to meetings. I watch the door for the next newcomer. Sometimes I put my arms around them and tell them, if you come to these meetings and you do what these good people ask you to do, you'll never be alone again. And I've lashed myself to the raft in service. Any of you remember the old Tom Hanks movie, Castaway? There's a scene in there where he ties himself to the raft, remember, so that he won't swim off in his dementia. That's what I've done with service, you know, because this disease is so cunning, powerful, baffling, isn't it? It's constantly telling me that I don't have it. Constantly telling me, you don't have to go to that meeting tonight. You could skip tonight. Yeah, but I'm the cake lady for the Midtown meeting. You know, I got to line up cakes, you know. So you can't walk away with that kind of heavy responsibility. And so I go, you know, I go. There's some research that I came across in my professional career that I want to share with you. There were a couple of researchers that they had identified a bunch of people who they could divide into two groups. Either a group that seemed capable of forgiving forgiving slights, and a group who seemed incapable or unwilling to forgive. They divided them into these two groups. Then they had all of the participants draw pictures of alien beings. And they had these drawings independently evaluated by three people, and they who didn't know which group the artists were in. And they said, we want you to evaluate these for creativity. And so the more unhuman-like, you know, like 3 eyes instead of 2, was how they kind of judged the more creative, imaginative drawings of alien beings. Here's what they found out. The people that drew the less creative drawings of alien beings were the people who seemed incapable of being able to forgive. That matters, the researchers said, because it suggests that failing to forgive creates additional cognitive load. In other words, it's like stuff running in the background of a computer. Remember how that kind of slows the computer down if it's doing all this stuff in the background? My brain is like that. So failing to forgive clutters my head with static on the line. I worked the steps to learn to forgive. I learned to forgive not for you, sorry. I learned to forgive for me, to clear the static off the line so I can be here now, present with you, so that I can hear God. Mount Everest. Find somebody to help. Latex gloves. There's a prayer that summarizes what my life is like today. I'd like to share with you. It says, I walk the paths of life on planet Earth, taking baby steps in wide-eyed wonder. You hold my hand and you guide my feet until I can leap into your imagination and become one with all that is holy. Thank you, God, for showing me the way. If I could tell you only one thing about my life, it would be this. On February 27th, 1996, I came crawling in here on my hands and knees, and you put your arms around me. You loved me when I was incapable of even liking myself, and you didn't even know me. There's a reading in February 11th, Courage to Change, that says, I know that I was pulled from despair by the love of strangers who quickly became friends. Thank you, friends. Thank you for my life. Thank you for asking me to share.